everyone. How's it going? I'm Kathy Yuen with Phase One Design. Welcome to our show, Going Custom, where we talk everything about custom homes. So thanks for joining us today. Quick intro, if you have not joined us in the past, I just want to give a shout out to my two colleagues who are experts in their field who are joining us today. We have Nick Petrie from Vancouver.
Everyone.
And also Colin Showalter from Calgary.
Hello.
Oh, okay. There was just a delay. Awesome. Today, it's Christmas Eve. I actually had something I was going to wear in my head. I forgot. I'm just going to put it on for 2 seconds. Today is like Who's Who in Whoville. This is what our marketing team came up with because it's Christmas themed. I'm not going to wear this the whole time, just so you guys know. Don't worry. So what we're going to talk about is who do you need on your project from the very beginning of the project to the very end of your custom home project. Before we get started, just want to say if you guys have any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat during the show, and we'll definitely answer the questions as best we can. If you're shy and don't want to drop anything in the chat, feel free to just PM private message any of us directly. We love hearing from our audience. And lastly, if you have any suggestions for future topics, feel free to also drop that in the chat. We love hearing from you guys. So let's dive in.
Well, Kathy, I can start. You're on with Whoville theme and Christmas theme. I'll be the Grinch and say, custom home is going to be expensive, right? So there's a reason that you want to really focus on the key areas that are budget drivers. So being the Grinch is that these homes are very expensive, and we've all seen the inflation numbers since COVID and stuff. It's been crazy in construction in general.
For sure.
So anything you can do to kind of mitigate as much of that as possible is that's why it's important. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think before we dive into like the actual who's that you need on your custom home project, I will say, I was actually thinking about this like this morning. I think one piece of advice that is really valuable to share with our viewers is that the sooner you get all your ducks in a row and get everybody lined up at the beginning of the project, the more money you're actually going to save on your project. Because you're giving yourself a lot of time for the planning side, and the amount of effort and time that you invest into the planning and the pre-construction, it's going to pay off tenfold on the construction side. I guess, just as we get started, I do want to say today what we're going to be going through is really like a lot of the details of who's involved in a custom home project. But for all of our viewers, don't feel overwhelmed because maybe we'll start here. There's kind of like 3 key parties, actually more like 2 key parties that you're going to deal with throughout the entire process. But the purpose of today is just giving some details of behind the scenes of what actually happens, because I think, clients always want to know what's happening, but just keep in mind that at the end of the day, ultimately, there's 2 key parties that we need to deal with, you as custom homeowners would need to deal with, which is number 1, your design team, who should be leading you throughout the entire construction pre-construction process, not just the design. Depending on the designer, this is what we do. The second party would be the home builder. And I think that one's a little more obvious because the trades and, everybody that's involved on the construction piece. But yeah, why don't we get started on who's involved on the pre-construction side under the design team?
Well, on the design team, so obviously you've got your building designer and or architectural technologists. And depending on the project, you may or may not want your interior designer in right away, or sometimes just a little bit in once you know exactly where your walls are going and everything else.
Totally.
Once that's spaced out. But then you're also wanting to get that builder in, because even though technically they're not on your design team, in one sense they are, right? Like you need that. Anyway, sorry, just my 2 bits, right? Like having that, yes, this is feasible, but here's the costs, right? Like as Colin was mentioning, costs are kind of key, right? So having that earlier on, and we can do that. Do you have $10,000 or $20,000 or $30,000, right? You want a really incredibly custom fancy railing. That should all be discussed, right? Back and forth. Anyway, sorry, I'm going off, but I'll let you guys go.
Yeah, well, I like to your point, Nick, so the very first person or team that would be on any custom home project would be, I'm going to be generalizing it and call it your design team. But behind the scenes, there's a whole bunch of different consultants. So I guess like kind of starting off, one of the first steps that we always do is we engage a surveyor. So surveyors going to go out to your site and, give us all the survey points that we need in order to start the design. In Vancouver, Nick, we need an arborist report. You want to talk about that?
Yeah. Well, I mean, and this happens all over BC in general, but yeah, where you've got trees over a certain size, it depends on the municipality. Most common, it's 12 inches, but over a certain size, they need an arborist to review whether they can be come down or they can be trimmed, because a heck of a lot of times we're just close enough to the root structure that, you go to put a foundation in and they have to chop the roots. And the next thing you know, 5 years later, that tree rotted because the roots were cut the wrong way and the tree comes down on the house. So you need to have an arborist involved early to deal with that and make sure, you're not opening yourself up to risks later in the project. So,
and that's actually a mandatory requirement too. So, I mean, depending on which municipality you're in, but, I'll use City of Vancouver as an example. Before you even start design of a home, the arborist needs to go in there and, like you say, Nick, do an assessment of not only the city-owned trees, but the private trees that are on the private property. And then there's an assessment done as to whether or not we can remove the tree, keep it, or, what do we need to do if there's special foundation details or we need to move the building. They take all those types of things into account.
Yeah, exactly. And Vancouver, I should say, is 8 inches, not 12. I was using 12 as the common, but it's a common requirement in half the municipalities. So in the Lower Mainland, at least.
Yeah, and I was going to add to that, if you're not in a municipality specifically, maybe you're in a rural area, a rural municipality or whatever they're called from province to province, the pre-construction things you're going to need to know there is okay, how am I going to service this place? Where am I pulling power from? Where's my septic field going to go? What type of septic are we going to use? Do I have adequate water for well servicing? All those kind of things. And, if you don't consider some of those, I mean, if you're bringing power in for 2 kilometers or something, that's going to really add a big cost to your project, right? So, a lot of people overlook that stuff early on, thinking that they'll sort it out, but then there's lots of ways to do it, right? And I mean, even if you're in an urban property, sometimes maybe you need to move power poles to give you better access to the site or those kind of things. So definitely part of your upfront consideration.
Yeah. Colin, that's a really great point. I'll share a story. I know there was a project, this was a few years ago. We were designing a custom home on an acreage property, and it was actually a smaller site and it was very complex. So there was actually, even though on paper it looked like the site was really, really large, the actual buildable site area, because there was a lot of rolling hills and trees and streams and all sorts of different things happening, the actual build site was actually quite small. And then one of the first things that we did, to your point, is we brought on a septic consultant. And by the time we did the calculation of how big that septic field needed to be, it took an area that was this big, which was the total lot. And then we're okay, you can only build on this much. But then after the septic review, it was okay, you can actually only build on this much, right? To actually properly service it. So lots of examples.
Well, and they really go hand in hand with design too, Kathy, right? Because a lot of times the septic is going to be designed based on the occupancy loads of the building that's going on there, right? So it's kind of the chicken and the egg thing where they really need to be kind of done in conjunction. So good points there.
Yeah, we had a similar one, once again, acreage, 2 acres. But something we had to keep in mind was that it was near a floodplain for a river. And so all of a sudden we're having to push back, like you were saying, and the envelope kept getting smaller and smaller as to what you could build. And we had to negotiate. We had to have an environmental consultant in there as well to try and negotiate with the city and say, okay, we're too close to the stream. I get we're too close to the stream. Can we push it over here? Will you let it? And it's just having all those extra consultants in there, just making sure everything goes smoothly, right? So
that's a really good point, Nick. That actually made me think of something. So when we come across properties like that, very often our clients will come to us with already land that they've acquired, right? So, which is great. We're super happy to, jump into the project at that point. However, there are also other clients. I wish there were more clients like this, which actually engage us a little bit earlier on, where they say, hey, I'm looking at this piece of land very seriously. I have an offer, and maybe they tied it up. And then they put a due diligence period in it where we will go in and do a deep dive assessment to be okay, here are the things that are real concerns, and here are the things that maybe are not much of a concern, and then give that advice as to whether or not it's a good property to buy for what it is they want to build. Because
You know,
I
it's a
think
good point, because like a lot of times when I'm talking to clients, I'm like, there's certain things in the budget that you can control, and there's certain things that you can't control, right?
Yeah.
So, you know, if you've already bought the land and you're firm on it, now anything that is cost driven by the land, you can no longer control, right? So I mean, to your point, the sooner you can kind of get some consultant eyes on that property to understand what the total impact of the build site is going to be, then that's going to be the most beneficial for your overall project.
Absolutely. Yeah. I will say too, Nick, you just also touched on, you know, we've been talking a lot about like the actual site and like the things that we need to do on the physical site itself. But the other thing that is good to do at the very beginning, depending on the project, is to have consultation with the municipality. Again, this is something that you as a homeowner don't need to do. You're like, your design team should be doing this. But you know, a perfect example, Nick, you said an environmental consultant. So I will give an example. A lot of our projects in West Vancouver, if you're within a certain distance to a creek, or, you know, there's certain things that trigger this requirement, then you might need to engage an environmental consultant. There's a different level of permits you might need to do. Like it can get quite complex, which is not a good thing or a bad thing. It just is what it is. But you definitely want to know a couple of things moving forward into it. And to your point, Colin, that's a great point that you brought forward with regards to, you know, site-driven costs. Those are the things that when we're just past the site, you know, like after the client acquires it and we're like, oh, by the way, we're going to need to have a bunch of retaining walls, you know,
or you're hanging off the side of a cliff. So that's,
exactly. Which is super cool. But I mean, obviously that comes with we designed cliff houses and, but
they just have to sacrifice their wine cellar or something for it, I guess.
There always is a balancing point, or you know, for the future. So
for sure. Yeah, so you're and we're talking more with regards to like when we say design team, that would be like similar to like how our team is set up. So the architectural design component and then the interior design component. And to your point, Nick, the builder is kind of like the second key party, which, you know, even though I'm saying like they're two separate things, like there's a huge value to bringing on a builder into those conversations in the earlier phases of the project. You know, and we've touched on this in previous episodes, but the builder is very valuable in those conversations, but you don't necessarily have to like engage them formally, right? And pick them right.
Well, no, you can do like either a pre-construction, like you can have just casual conversations, but also you can do a pre-construction management project with them, right? How many projects have we done where like the builder, depending on the builder, right? Some of them do it for different prices, but I mean, $2,500, $5,000, and it's a retainer that they pull against just to answer questions and go through and give you those early feedbacks so you don't go too far down. Anyways, just by Sorry?
You would only pay for what you use in that scenario. So
exactly.
You're getting a bunch of information, but you're paying for that information. And I mean, realistically, and I think that's one of the challenges within the industry as a whole, right? Is it's like, you know, no one wants to like say charge for an estimate or charge for doing proposal or that kind of stuff. But, you know, you kind of have to understand that this is going to take those builders, say, for example, hours and hours to put something together. And if they're not charging you for it, they're not putting hours and hours into it, which means that it's probably not that accurate, right? So, you know, if they're going to charge you for an upfront proposal and then be able to credit that against the build or just charge you the hours, I mean, that's just a great investment to your overall, you know, investigation of the feasibility of the project, really.
Yeah. 100%. And I would say like, okay, so even let's just use the number 5,000. If a pre-construction contract was $5,000 that a builder charged, let's say a homeowner client, and then, you know, they put in the 60 to 80 hours to actually do like the estimate properly. I will say in my experience of doing this for like almost 20 years, oh God, I feel old. In my experience, the ones I've seen, like that investment of the 5,000, like easily you save that in terms of like having a realistic budget and having it early on enough that you can adjust certain things within the budget if required, right? To either save money or like, you know, get the budget back to where it needs to be, things like that.
Yeah, no, you can go ahead, Colin.
Sorry, the next, like there's a sort of overlap points, but two things that I had on my list to talk about here, and this kind of goes hand in hand, like with the builder and the designer and the budgeting side of things, is that, you know, once you sort of have that concept dialed in, right, for your initial concepts of this custom home, I really think as a homeowner, as much as you don't necessarily want to invest time to like research every product or this and that goes into your house, I think that if you can identify some big key, ticket items that you want to just educate yourself on as a homeowner a little bit more, because the example I'm going to give, and I'm sure we can all use it, is that like windows, for example, right? Is that I have seen on the exact same house a window quote for 40 grand and a window quote for 175 grand. Well, that's not saying one's way cheaper than the other. Those are just a totally different scope of window, right? So I think that that's a big ticket item that can really drive costs. And so for you to spend, a couple hours and go to a couple window showrooms and understand, like, do I really need this high quality operating this and that on this window that I'm never going to open or not, right? So I think it's worth investing some hours in that sort of stuff. And I also think the other example I gave was like floor joist trusses. You have a bunch of different options on those kind of things, right? You can have bulkheads below and use eye joists, or you can have no bulkheads and use open web joists or something, right? So obviously there's a different cost, but there's also a different importance and priority placed on those kind of things. Is it important to spend money on these areas for me because I don't want bulkheads? Well, those are the kind of things you can really look at. And also things like structural, right, in construction, it's pretty straightforward, right? The bigger spans or bigger beams make bigger money, right? Or bigger window openings make bigger costs. So those are kind of the simplest ways I kind of was looking at it from a construction point of view, is just like focusing on the things again that you can control, and decide which things are priority that you're willing to pay for and which things are not priority that you don't need to pay for. So
and then related to that, because you touched on a really good point with regard to the flooring structural. If you are using open web or floor truss, whatever you want to call it, for example, how much are you getting your trades to reprice because they have less labor to do, right? So it costs more for the floor floor structure because it's open, but then again, all your plumbing, your mechanical can run through super fast, and you're not like. So are you? Yeah, you know what I'm saying, right? So there's savings, and you just have to figure out what makes the most sense, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, and that goes with really every aspect of the build, right? Is that if you're, I mean, even when we're all looking at these things from design side of things, when people are trying to use new technologies or new ideas and new this, it's like, well, for example, if you build a more efficient house, a more energy efficient triple pane windows with upgraded walls, maybe you actually can downsize the furnace now. Because you don't need as much, right? And so I know a lot of times I've heard the stories over the years where the mechanical contractors literally just come in and they say, okay, 5,000 square feet, this many BTUs per square foot, here's your furnace, right? But I mean, that's for a 1990s run-of-the-mill, leaky, doesn't meet building code home anymore, right? So I think we do have to push back on some of that stuff too, from all the trades, contractor, suppliers, and really just like understand, is the scope they're providing what we need and want, right?
Absolutely. And it's really just like that collaboration, right, with all these different scopes, like whether it's the mechanical guy or the floor truss guy, and there's just like such a long list. This is actually a pretty good segue to kind of the latter stages of like who's involved in the project. So we talked a lot about the beginning, the very, very beginning part, like the due diligence before designs even started. And at some point you're going to have a design on a set of drawings, and then you'll be probably in a permitting process of some sort, like somewhere in there, just depending on which municipality, if there's a development permit required or not. Towards the later stages, there are some really key team members that are involved. The design team that you're working with should be coordinating these consultants behind the scenes. They are very critical, and not just critical, they are mandatory as per the building code for a building permit submission. So you guys already touched on a couple, the floor joist supplier and the truss supplier, which very often are the same person. The structural engineer, which does all the structural design on the home that doesn't fall under the umbrella of like what we can do as architectural technologists. And then what else? There's more. Windows. We talked about window suppliers coordinating to make sure. Sorry.
You got
structural.
mechanical, your mechanical contractors and mechanical engineers, depending on how.
Someone put in the chat here, elevators. Elevators are obviously something I
we
think
should
you
talk about
might want to
elevators.
get with the elevator consultant early, just
Yes.
to understand their sizing and their rough opening requirements, right? So
Yeah,
there you go.
Or our elevator friends out there. Yes. Let's talk about elevators.
Yeah. Well, like just how big an elevator do you need? What's the opening? What's the orientation? Like
I mean, we might as well just start with saying that a lot of homes nowadays are getting elevators. So this is actually quite a topic. As we see, real estate prices increase and whatever, people are just staying in their homes longer. And a lot of our designs, we're just seeing that like the age in place is a big component of a custom designed home now. And so more and more of them have elevators. So I think that's why it's a good point to touch on.
I agree. And I will say, like, when we look at our custom homes, if you look at our clients, I would say 80 to 90% easily have at least an elevator rough-in. So an elevator rough-in is when you want to put the unit in. Personally, I just feel like if you're going to go that far, you may as well just put the elevator in rather than go back later and do a renovation. But that is an option. Yeah. An elevator too. I mean, it's one of those things, Colin, you mentioned, to go out there and do a bit of homework. And I agree. Like, I feel like elevator kind of falls under that category because it's such a personalized unit. Like, everybody's going to have different needs. And in the design process, generally what we do is we'll just leave a cavity that's available that will fit, the majority of elevator sizes. And then that gives our clients the opportunity to go out there and shop out the elevators because there's so many different options. They're actually really cool. It's kind of like buying a car. Like, there's like that many options out there, right?
Yep.
But I will
the base model and then the high level Mercedes. Nice.
Right. And then I will also say elevators, yes, they're good for aging in place, but it's funny when we go back and talk to our clients that have elevators, most of them are like, oh, I use them for, basically moving anything up and down the stairs, like new furniture or my luggage when I travel and, like making jokes about how now you
can. Well, that's the thing. Once you have it, you're going to use it, right? Even though you don't think you need it.
Yeah. Well, we're doing one where we're doing a reverse floor plan. And it's getting the groceries from the ground floor up to the kitchen, right? Because they don't want to lug all the groceries up.
Right, makes sense. You see a lot of that out in Vancouver, I imagine.
Yeah, a few actually, quite a few. I've got a few on the go right now, and it's always interesting. Like, do you plan out your framing so that you've got a box that's already pre-framed out, so that you can take out that square and just drop the elevator in later, right? And you can just play with it easily, right? So anyway.
Yeah. I guess just back to, one consultant we should touch on is the energy consultant. Because I think this is more, I would say, very, very important for they're important for all of our projects, but in particular in BC, where, and, Greater Vancouver, where the step code is a very real thing. I think, there's been a lot of conversation about step code. And, I guess for me, always the takeaway is that the sooner you understand where you want to go from like an energy perspective, the easier it is to make decisions around that. So I'll give you an example. Like, if you come to us and say, hey, I would like to invest in, let's say like a net zero ready house. Okay, well, what exactly does that mean? How does that play out on the budget side, on the design side? And in some municipalities in BC, if you already know you're going to go that direction, you get actually what's called dense, like FSR bonuses. So basically you get more square footage allowable from the municipality because you are doing a certain level of energy efficiency. So that's huge, especially, when property values are so expensive. You want to definitely maximize the property as much as possible.
Yep. Get us every last bit you can. And I mean, we've got tons of projects, especially in Vancouver, which have the highest incentives. But I mean, I would say 3/4 of the projects we're doing in Vancouver right now are all net zero or passive because of it. But besides that, I mean, you can look at energy advisors from a couple of different ways. But one of them is actually talking to them, and it's not about the energy consumption. It's actually about how healthy this home is going to be, because you're talking to them and like, well, if we can get the air tightness down to this, we can reduce your mold or your possibility of mold, which is a big thing in BC. That we can get it down below this point. We can also reduce the size of your mechanical equipment, and you don't need this anymore. And all of a sudden things shift, right? Energy advisors are incredibly useful.
Well, and that's the thing, Nick, is you just like you hit it right on the head there, is that, you need to really consider the structure as a whole, right? It's like you can't just throw a bunch of insulation and fill a bunch of windows and this. And, like over the years, I spent a lot of time with the SIP industry over the years. And one of the challenges they always fought against is that they were so airtight that they now created a humidity problem in the house, right? So then what happens? Well, all of a sudden there's mold and there's this and that. Well, creating a house that's more airtight sounds like it shouldn't be a problem, but you know what I mean? It sounds logical, right? So what it is that now you have to involve the mechanical guy to make sure that he's got adequate air exchanges and these kind of things. But, ultimately you're fixing a problem that creates another problem, sort of, but you're in the direction of improving the quality of the building with each step, right?
100%.
And there's ways around that too with SIPs, because you can design it like most of the house is made out of SIPs, and then you've got one or two very breathable walls where, say, for under your windows, build that out of a different material that actually breathes, and then all your moisture is going out. There's ways to work with that and have the mechanical shift, or putting in an HRV that has a condensation collection unit in it and vents it out. Huge thing in Quebec is that all the HRVs have to have condensation functions in them to get all the moisture out, because they get so cold there, the moisture gets trapped and then you're stuck, right? Anyway,
fluctuations are wild.
This is a great conversation. I know we're not talking about high performance homes right now, but I think like what you guys are describing right now, let's just touch on that briefly, because it actually has to do with,
I guess, Kathy, what I was going to say, though, like, specifically, though, just on that point to kind of summarize it, is that, like, in the construction industry, one thing affects another thing that affects another thing. So this is kind of why we're talking about this, is you need everyone in the same room, making sure you're considering all the different things that are going to come up, and that you have as many experts there supporting you as possible. So, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, that's pretty much very much in line with what I was going to say. Using the car analogy, I love using car analogies because I love cars and I love houses. But homes these days, and it's a term that's very commonly used, especially like in BC, is like high performance homes, right?
Yeah.
So, as you go shopping for a car, like the price ranges from here to here, but usually the price range is also indicative of the quality of the car, right? Yep. So, right now we're seeing like homes that are basically like on the like super, super far end of the spectrum in terms of, the quality of the actual build itself, like design aside, right? So like you say, like building these airtight homes, and the high performance homes, I think, is something that more people are very interested in, because you're going to build a home, you want it to last for a very long time, and when you're living in it, you want it to be comfortable. So, for sure, like I'm a designer, like design is 100% important, but it's really cool. I think you're seeing a shift of consumers like actually caring. I know that sounds really bad, but like actually caring about like the quality of the walls and the windows, and like how does the home actually perform. I will say, like 20 years ago when I started in this industry, like everybody was just like, oh, give me like a really nice like looking home, and they don't those conversations never happened.
No, I mean, and the thing is, Kathy, like the building code is going to drive everyone kind of in that direction anyways. But I think that we always kind of lose sight, kind of a closing thought here. We lose sight that yes, they're homes, they're dream homes and all that kind of stuff. But, as inflation continues on these assets, is really what they are. They're assets. These are going to be generational assets. So they're going to get passed down to the next families and stuff like that, right? And so like, why wouldn't you want it to be still standing and performing and and those kind of things, right? So it really, these kind of considerations are not off, just basic logic, really, right? You just want to make sure you have as much information you can before you're making a huge decision like that financially, right? So
most of our clients these days are all looking, like you said, at the generational side of things. They're planning on
that's a great point.
Kids, the grandkids. So
it is an asset, and it's probably the biggest asset of their lives, probably,
Oh yeah.
Sure. So we are almost out of time here, so we're just going to wrap up. So I guess in summary, I mean, as you've seen from this brief conversation, there are so many different people involved in the success of a custom home project. And again, don't want to overwhelm any homeowners out there that are new to this process. Again, your two kind of key players that a homeowner needs to deal with is your design team and your builder, and they will lead you through all this process, and they know who to bring in, when to bring them in, all that. Like, this is the stuff we do in our sleep, because this is what we do. So First of all, I just want to say thank you for all of our viewers for joining us for this amazing conversation. Next week, we're actually going to be doing a special episode that's geared more towards our Vancouver or Greater Vancouver friends. We're going to be talking about a crazy topic called permit timeframes in Greater Vancouver. So we're going to be sharing some inside scoop about that. We get asked that question all the time.
We'll be sitting that one out because I'm the Calgary guy, but I'll let you guys dive deep because I don't have a lot to add to it. But
yeah, but then the following week, then the following Thursday, Colin and I were going to be doing a special episode with regards to the Calgary blanket rezoning and like what the future is of that, because we also get a lot of questions about that. So thanks so much, Nick. Thanks so much, Colin, for joining us today. Thanks to our viewers. Again, feel free to message us with any questions. And lastly, if you have any topics you want to talk about for future episodes, feel free to drop that in our chat too. Thanks so much for watching, guys. And we'll see you next week. Bye for now.